there is there are those of us in media, and I had somebody criticize me a couple of weeks ago saying, "Well, you're media too." When I was referring to mainstream media, I am alternative media, if you will. And alternative media really it existed under the shadows, if you will, or behind the shadows in this country for decades, and it never really emerged until Rush Limbaugh's debut nationally, nearly 30 years ago. And then alternative media really grew, and then the internet helped it grow as well. So you had all of these developments come along, and people started getting sources. Here's the thing. I think even though I've criticized a lot of people in mainstream media on the program, most would tell you they don't know everything. Some might think it, but they're not going to publicly state it. And I'm the same way. I can't possibly know everything. There's just not enough time to read everything, watch everything, see everything. There's a hilarious story that comes out of Houston, Texas. I was just talking about it with some of my coworkers as I ran down to the little boys' room and back during the news break. A reporter in Houston works for a Fox television affiliate there, and he was out doing a story on road rage. Now, when I was a young reporter, I would have to go out and do man on the street interviews. It's hard to believe, but there was a time in my life when I was shy. And I would go out and I would do these interviews because I had to do them. But it wasn't easy to walk up to a stranger on the street, ask them a question, and sometimes you got some responses that weren't very nice. And, you're just trying to do your job. You're not trying to irritate somebody. You're under orders to do it. And if you don't do it, you might lose your job. So I would grit my teeth and I would go do these. And one day, one of my coworkers, Ted DeLuca, who was not a shy guy, Ted was a sportscaster and he was a very outgoing individual. I'll put it that way. He ended up moving and actually worked in Houston himself for a while. Ted said to me, he said, "I hate doing these." He said, "Unlike you." And I said, "No, Ted, I hate doing them too." He said, "Yeah, but you come back with such good stuff." And I said, "I grit my teeth and I just keep asking people questions and after question and after question. And sooner or later, it's like a sales call. You just keep going out and banging on doors and eventually someone buys." So I would go out and I would do these interviews, and the first half a dozen people might curse at me, call me names, get out of my way, leave me alone. And then someone would stop. And I remember one time doing one of these on the 20th anniversary of the Watergate break-in, and the first half a dozen to 10 people I talked to weren't very nice. And then I saw a lawyer I knew. He was a local politician coming down the street, and I asked him about it, and he said to me, "Oh," he said, "I was working for Congressman John Hughes in Washington when that happened, and I remember exactly the details." He said, "Because I had an apartment over at the Watergate complex." Bingo, I got my story for the day because of his recollections of everything that went on there. But over time, I did so many of these things, I was no longer shy about going out on the street and asking these questions. In fact, it got to the point where I had almost a 180-degree turn. I wanted to go do them. And I didn't care if someone gave me grief. After a while, you could put together some pretty good stories. So this reporter in Houston, Texas, goes out on the street, apparently in the last couple of days, to do a story on road rage. And he's asking all of these people on the street about road rage and traffic issues. And this guy comes walking down the street and he's in a purple tank top. Now, purple is going to play a key role in all of this. And he stops the guy and he asks the guy about road rage. And the guy gives him an answer. And the guy talks at length and he's very astute, and he seems like he's really good with the media, like he's been interviewed before. And the reporter finishes, and of course, what we would always do is ask somebody for their name. If we didn't always have to do that in radio because you couldn't see them, and I would just string together a bunch of sound bites. But in TV, you want to identify someone; it's a visual medium. He says to the guy, "Well, what's your name, sir?" And the guy says, "Adrian Peterson." Reporter says, uh, "That Adrian Peterson?" Now, if you're not a sports fan, that doesn't mean anything to you, but Adrian Peterson is a Hall of Fame running back, will be in the Hall of Fame. He just missed a few years ago the all-time single-season rushing record because I don't think they realized near the end of the game he was just a few yards shy of it. And he's been a huge star with the Minnesota Vikings for many, many years. Peterson actually thought this guy was coming up to him to ask him a question about football because Peterson, the Vikings say they're not going to renew his contract. They're going to let him go in free agency, even though he's been the best player they've had since Fran Tarkenton retired in the late 1970s. Peterson is a huge star, one of the best ever to play the position, but the Vikings just are looking at his age and saying, we got to find somebody younger and rebuild the team for the future. So he thought, so there you go. The reporter had no idea that that's who he was talking to, and the guy was so articulate. Well, it's because he's been sitting in front of microphones since he was in high school 15 years ago. 9/11. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Talking a little bit about the media this morning. The Daily Signal has this headline: only 3% of NBC and CBS reports depict the president positively. What are they talking about? A mere 3% of reports about President Donald Trump that aired on NBC and CBS Nightly News were positive, according to an analysis by the nonpartisan press research firm Media Tenor. The report found 43% of stories on those two networks about Trump were negative, while another 54% of reports were considered neutral. The study also examined Fox Nightly News coverage of Trump, which was still broadly negative but more neutral. Media Tenor deemed 12% of Fox's stories positive and 25% negative, with the remaining 63% being seen as neutral. Think about that. Every time you hear some liberal friend of yours say that Fox News is just a mouthpiece for Donald Trump or the Republican Party, again, he doesn't get a break over there either. And then a fellow by the name of Jacob Hubert. Jacob Hubert is a lawyer writing a guest commentary at the Wall Street Journal today about the media. Says the media complains they don't get enough access to Donald Trump or Sean Spicer. However, in many instances, who gets into the gaggle? For instance, in the gallery at Capitol Hill and various places, these things are actually determined by media. Media will select various reporters to take part in a pool or sit in on a news conference because there's not enough room for everybody out there. In the old days, prior to the real growth of media in this country, you had UPI, AP, you had a few big newspapers. The networks at the time, if they in the early days of radio, they really didn't have what you'd call huge news departments. CBS built one just in time for World War II. Edward R. Murrow, who wasn't even a news guy, he was a school teacher, put that together. And then over at NBC, they had a fellow named E.R. Curley Vadabancourt, who helped create one of, I know this because I worked at one of the radio stations he founded. So the press pools were relatively small. A few wire guys from the wire services, a few newspaper guys, and maybe a broadcast reporter or two. And then during the 1950s, the television networks came along, and suddenly you had 3 people covering these events. Still, the press gaggles were small. In this day and age, you have reporters from around the world who come here to cover stories. They have bureaus set up in the United States. You have this explosion of websites from the internet, and they're all looking for seats in the room. Not everybody can get a seat. And this writer is explaining that he represented a reporter in his home state. I believe it was Michigan. What happened was the guy was in the business for 25 years, a well-known newspaper reporter and editor. He'd covered the State House. He decided to leave his job with a newspaper and go to work for a not-for-profit. He was then denied a press pass to some of the biggest events at the state capitol, not by the politicians so much as by the media who determined who got the press passes. So the next time you hear media complain it's not getting the access it wants to various politicians, it tries to exclude people it doesn't like because it wants to hold on to its monopoly. They don't want the competition. This is a little bit like those people who create regulations around the country in order to stop other people. For instance, in some states, there are battles going on. A lot of poor women have started braiding hair for their neighbors and friends, and they might get $5 or $10. A little extra pin money for around the house, a little extra money at the grocery store to feed the kids. Now you've got people, the cosmetology associations, which have licensing, and through that licensing, you also have a lobbying effort. They go to the state houses and say, well, you know, it might be dangerous to have Kenesha over there braid your hair. So you need to come and spend $50 instead at my shop, or $100, and I'll braid it for you. And that way you know you won't be harmed because I'm licensed. The latest one comes out of Tennessee. 2 women have been charged with rubbing horses. I know what that sounds like. It's not what you think. Two women, they were fond of horses, but horses sometimes, especially those horses who are used in the racing industry and in some other occupations, end up with muscle issues, and they need to be massaged. These two women started massaging horses, and they were good at it. So friends started hiring them to come over to their farms and stables and do the massaging. Did you know that in Tennessee that they have a professional organization of horse masseuses? And they didn't like it. They complained. Now the government of the state of Tennessee is charging these women, and they could go to jail for rubbing horses. Media is no different than all of those organizations in trying to protect its piece of cake, if you will, its slice of the pie, and it will go after people. Media doesn't like the fact that Breitbart gets access at news conferences to Donald Trump, despite the argument Breitbart could make that it has a readership so vast and large it rivals some of the big newspapers in this country. Media doesn't like it because media thinks Breitbart is just a mouthpiece, a propaganda tool for the Trump White House. And you know what? I'd agree with that. On the other hand, CNN was a propaganda tool for Barack Obama for 8 years. How does that differ from Breitbart in that sense? And again, who gets to make the decisions of who gets access, who gets into what room, who gets into what event? Once more, that's a decision that should not be left to establishment old line media. 9:18, Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. While we're on the subject of Trump, one last note before we actually go to the break. A writer by the name of Ann Kim at something called Washington Monthly. She despises Donald Trump, but she says today that if Trump leaves, Trumpism is still here to stay. And she's warning all of the liberals out there who think they're going to push Donald Trump out of office and remove him and somehow restore Barack Obama, even though it would be unconstitutional to bring him back as president, or somehow get Elizabeth Warren in there. She says that the causes of what she calls Trumpism aren't going away. She says a stagnant economy is the reason we have Trump supporters, and their numbers will be growing if we don't turn the economy around. So all of the liberals out there who seem to think that they can just call up their buddies at the New York Times and get Trump somehow removed ought to be taking a second look at all of this. Speaking of a look, how about your hearing? I wanted to mention my friend Dr. Christine Pickup at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. She is a doctor of audiology, and people have been asking me for a long time, look, I don't have to drive to Rupert. Why would I go there to her office? There are other people doing hearing health. Well, the experience that she offers is the key. Dr. Pickup is a certified audiologist with 17 years serving the hearing impaired of all ages. True diagnostic testing will help you to know what the causes of your hearing loss happen to be, and that's going to lead to the best treatment options. Trust your hearing to a certified audiologist. Call Mount Harrison Audiology today for your appointment. The number 208-312-0957. Mr. Trump may be ready to move on offering protections to Christians in America who are under attack from all sorts of liberals and cross-dressers. Details on the way. We may be able to start calling CNN the collusion news network. Story just breaking this morning from Ben Shapiro. CNN deploys Valerie Jarrett's daughter to cover Trump Justice Department. No. There won't be any conflict there. Not at all. The sins of the mother are not shared or bestowed upon the daughter. It's 9:23. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 30. I do want to point out I'm going to go back to Cassia County in a couple of weeks into the Declo area, and I'm going to go there and see the finished product. I was over there a couple of weeks back looking at it's an old farmhouse that is being converted into a private lodge for the artist Robert Moore, and I got to tour some of the rooms in this building. One of the rooms is purported to be the oldest standing room in Cassia County. Beautiful location, mountain views, and some fields nearby. Just a canal runs by this lodge. But the work that's been going on inside, they've been replacing beams and, there were some structural issues. You take a house that originally had been a one-room cabin and then expanded on a number of times, it needed some work. So there's a company called Western Visions Inc. that has gone in there, and this company does high-end restorations. They build kitchens that can be used for, if you have a lot of guests come by for holidays or visiting, you can have a large kitchen. They use a lot of LED lighting. They use the LED lighting in this particular place, and this particular lodge is going to be to reflect upon some of the paintings, the artwork that is done by the owner. So I have seen some of the work that's going on, replacement of floors, replacement of windows, and it is just going to be a warm and inviting lodge when it's all finished and done. Western Visions delivers comprehensive in-house structural, exterior, and interior design services, providing a level of service, attention to detail, and an understanding of your needs and desires that is second to none. And you can learn more if you go to the website western-visions.com. That's western-visions.com. We have a couple of callers, I think, looking to reach us this morning. 736-0300, the telephone number on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. You're on the air.
Wow, Bill. I'm hearing all these reports about these mental health professionals are saying that all these people that voted for Clinton are having some serious mental problems. I mean, that's kind of scary,
I think they had them beforehand, but so they would just be a continuance.
I think it's only fair that we all chip in and maybe we can get some centers open, for mental health screening for a lot of these people and get them the help they need. I think it's only fair.
Well, their political party would just say create a new government program at our expense.
That's a good weekend.
You too. Thank you much for the telephone call. As I said, 736-0300, 736-0300. Daily Signal has this: conservative leaders call on the president to protect religious freedom. You didn't see a lot of that in the country over the last 8 years. Conservative leaders would like the president to move forward on an executive order to protect the exercise of religious beliefs by rolling back Obama-era regulations that targeted Catholic charities, the Salvation Army, a military chaplain, Christian business owners, and others. Remember the story about the chaplain who was going to be drummed out of the military because he would not counsel people who were having transgender issues or same-sex desires? And he pointed out, he said, well, I've got this Bible thingy here that gets in the way, and that's why I'm here. Well, no, you should just be a counselor. Well, then you don't need pastors. You need people to come in who are psychologists and psychiatrists. Hire them instead, but don't call them chaplains. 927. Caller, you're up next. You're on KLIX.
Hi, Bill. Here's a topic that you can hit out of the park. One of the most powerful media people was created by Newsweek, who wouldn't print the story about Bill Clinton and Monica, but the unknown Drudge did. And look at Drudge Today.
Drudge Today, and you have a number of these organizations. It was National Enquirer that uncovered John Edwards. And mainstream media refused to do it. Oh, but he's a good fellow traveler. We wouldn't want to hurt his feelings. And we'd like him to be president someday, so therefore we're going to ignore all of these stories. And then when National Enquirer proved it, I remember watching Diane Sawyer, who was not a real reporter, we should point out. She worked for Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon was no conservative Republican. She got into reporting afterward. Diane Sawyer, sitting on one of the newscasts after this story broke about Edwards and media, mainstream media had egg all over its faces, if you will, because I guess that would be all the plural in there. And she said, oh, we have to re-examine our business. We have to do soul searching. So they sit around for 2 or 3 days and say, yes, we need to look at our own performance. All right, we've looked long enough. All right, let's go back to doing what we always do. And very quickly on this story, the signers of this effort to get the president to move forward with protecting religious charities, according to Sean Spicer, there will be something on the way soon. The signers of the letter to the president included Tony Perkins from the Family Research Council, Jenny Beth Martin, the CEO and co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots, Morton Blackwell, president of the Leadership Institute, Colin Hanna, president of Let Freedom Ring, L. Brent Bozell, president of the Media Research Center, and Richard Viguerie, the chairman of Conservative HQ. Richard Viguerie's a really good guy. When I was a college student and I thought I was destined to be a flaming liberal or wild-eyed socialist when I was younger, somebody when I was in college handed me a copy of one of Richard Viguerie's books, and I read it, and it was like, wow. And I told him one time, I gave him credit. I said, you put me on the road. Some other people helped along the way, Cal Thomas and some other big names from Washington, but Richard Viguerie was the guy who first opened my eyes. Details coming up on this issue, this faith issue, more details in just a moment on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. It's 9:30.